Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Nathan Fink, and this is New Hampshire Family Now, a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the show, we welcome Harvard Law faculty member, associate at Berkman Klein, and author of Sharehood, Leah Plunkett, to discuss big tech and our compulsion to overshare, as well as why her bio is so much better than mine. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hey, it's Nathan, co-host of New Hampshire Family Now. I wanted to take a quick break from the show because it occurred to me the other day that I've never asked you to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing is free, and when you do it, it helps our placement algorithms, making it that much easier for caregivers across New Hampshire to find valuable information and strategies for their families. Also, you'll be alerted when a new episode drops. And if you like the show, leaving a review helps us that much more. So go to wherever you get your podcast, type in New Hampshire Family Now, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. I say click it, because if you smash it, then you're going to need a new one. Thank you and enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today on the show, I'm excited to welcome Leah Plunkett, faculty member at Harvard Law School, faculty associate at Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and author of Sharehood, a book we will dive into. But among your many accomplishments, I think my favorite thing is that I learned that you're a parent of 2 children.
I am, yes.
Of course, we're going to get in there, but thank you so much for coming on the show.
Wonderful to be here.
Truly, though, when I lay our bios next to each other, I say to myself, do something with your life.
Oh, no.
I get so excited that you have kids because I think tucked into your tremendous wit and intelligence in your writing is this idea that you're often trying to pack so many things in the day. How do you even approach this idea of being an adult with many different hats?
Thank you so much for that wonderful invitation to reflect. So, couple of insights. I don't know if they generalize or not, but for me, I need to start the day exercising. May seem counterintuitive, right? If I start the day by ignoring everything else, getting into the woods ideally, or on the stationary bike, and then really just trying to bring gratitude and curiosity to having the immense privilege of having an amazing family and amazing work and amazing friends, and also a lot of humility, because some days don't work at all.
Yes.
And I would say my text threads are a lifeline, right? Yeah. And I think maybe for many of us during the pandemic, especially texting or, pick your sort of messaging form of choice here, really became at times the only way we were communicating with people outside of our home or our bubble.
Right.
But I would say for me, I've got just, a couple of those people and those cohorts from throughout my life, and just having in between, this obligation or that obligation, the ability to just have that quick check-in. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it is a substantive question, right? I'm trying to figure out X. Can you help me? But that to me goes such a long way toward balancing a day.
This idea that COVID changed the way we interact. A lot of times we talk about the way that COVID has changed the minds of our children.
Yes.
I fundamentally believe I'm different. We are different now. How are you carrying that mindset then into the work that you do?
I agree with everything you've just said about what it means to now be 3 years out from the beginning and have gone through this catastrophic life shift. And even those of us, and I count myself very fortunate to be among them, who survived,
yes,
who didn't get seriously sick, didn't lose a home, didn't lose a job. You're right. So much has changed. I think that my post-pandemic mindset has made me much more focused than I was in terms of what gets my attention, why it gets my attention, who gets my attention. And I think that having had this enforced period of time where so much was stripped away, where you couldn't just add in this one other thing or take on this one other project, right? Because you couldn't leave your home, or like many of us, I'm sure you were already working around the clock and sleeping for only a few hours here and there just to get your kids through remote school and get your own work done and make sure everyone was safe. So I think having so much that had to get stripped away has made me come back to this mercifully now reopened reality, just with a lot more focus and a lot more self-awareness about what lights me up.
Yeah. Every time I go into a setting, I ask myself if it's worth it to invite another person's biome. Can you name one thing that you said, you know what, in my life that goes?
Okay. I have not gone back to gatherings just because they're proximate. And I'm stumbling over the words because I really do love gatherings of just about any sort, right? Truly. I guess I don't love gatherings that are waiting in lines at airports, but I was very, very inclined to have a presumption of, oh, something fun is happening or humans are gathering near me. I should prioritize getting there. And I think not because I don't still enjoy that, but just because I've realized that time is so finite, I actually am much less inclined to just gravitate toward a gathering of some type because I happen to be near it. If that makes sense.
It does, actually. It makes a lot of sense because that, I think, in my weird way of saying biome and this and that, it's like this invitation to reprioritize.
Yes.
Which is interesting because I think of your book, Sharenting, which I want to get into.
Yes.
And I want to talk about this idea of needing affirmation regarding the narratives and the pathways we are on, or the narratives we tell ourselves, which in my life, when something works for me, I want to share it. But part of that sharing it is not only to see people replicate it, but it's also self-affirming. Am I on the right path? Right. Which leads into this idea of sharenting in our instinct as human beings to want to share.
That is such a wonderful invitation to explore. I think that impulse comes from a uniquely human, or what I would like to think in the face of all of this new, Chat GPT and emerging AI, I would like to think that it is a uniquely human attribute to be able to do two things. One is match ideas to language, so that there's some sort of affirmation, not just are we on the right path, but like, are we a human, right? Do we exist as a human? If we can sort of take what is percolating for us, whether or not we're translating it into action, and match words to it and have those words come back. The other, and I also hope this is a uniquely human attribute, if not, then maybe the robots will, I don't know, hopefully take pity on us, is this ability to just very primal to tell stories, to listen to stories, and to make predictions about not facts or data, but just about people. Is this a person who feels to me like a good person? Am I a good person? Am I living a virtuous life? What are the ways in which I'm inevitably not being as fully virtuous as I could be? And can I hold myself to account by confessing to a friend, I skipped my morning run this morning. I have to get back on track, right? And so I think that those, and I will not pretend to have any scientific or other disciplinary insight into, sort of the mechanics by which this idea of translating ideas into language, or telling and listening to stories and generating stories for this purpose of understanding one's own arc as a human or the arcs of other people. I don't know. Is that our neurological wiring? That I will not pretend to know. But I will say, as somebody, trained as an attorney, former practicing attorney, now legal academic, I do think that the field of law, both as an area of study and an area of practice, and in our field, they overlap quite a bit. There is something to this idea that humans, as distinct from robots and other, inanimate life forms, have a unique ability to take ideas about rules and ideas about ethics, translate them into concrete language. That language becomes law that ideally we all live under. And so I do think that, counter to perhaps popular stereotypes, which I don't adhere to, the law is actually a very human and a very story-based field to be in, both as a form of inquiry and as a form of professional practice.
Interesting. There's so much to unpack there. On one hand, I think there's this in me, it's like accept, reject, this idea that when we talk about law and we talk about it's story-based, I think, yes, you're absolutely right. And then we make it concrete. And then once it's concrete, the shadow it throws leaves me cold because it is so concrete. Do you see what I'm saying? So
I do.
So I get our impulse to essentially create these backstops, let's say, because I think they are propelling us towards a more virtuous self, to use your word. But in the interaction between that backstop and the self, there's always this play, whether or not it feels like it fits the shape I'm about to take. Because as you know, in parenting, this concrete shape, you've got fluid children, fluid beings, but it goes back to sharing, because as I share my journey, I am looking for affirmation. I'm looking for that to kind of test whether or not it is a virtuous path. And my instinct is to overshare.
Totally.
Right? Now, this goes into the whole premise of the book. How has our society really led to an overshare-like society?
So we've got a couple of stories to continue with that terminology going on there. We have the story of you and your partner, if you have one, your journey, your story as a parent or parents, as a family unit. And that is about you as an adult human trying to make sense of what it means to have tiny humans. Then the other story or stories, if you have more than one child, or actually even if you have one child, but at different stages, what are their stories? What are they experiencing? What is their inner life to the best of your ability to tell? What is their external life? What are they doing in school or activities or social relationships, right? Who are they? And so to try to get our arms even remotely around that whole collection of stories, and I haven't even gotten into the stories that then get layered on if you're fortunate enough to have family and friends and teams and theater and all of the other layers that are a blessing. And that's not a word I use often, but truly a blessing to have. How do all those stories interact? So we're trying, as always, and I think humans probably have always done this, also not a psychologist or, an anthropologist or whatever, but I think we've probably always had some version of sitting around a campfire, sharing our stories. Now you layer on digital life. And you layer on the fact that digital life makes some of these stories as you live them more complicated. I am so glad, right? I will just stop and say thank you for the fact that some of my most embarrassing or otherwise complex or negative experiences as a child or adolescent, and I've had a very happy life, but we all have our moments, right? Those aren't digital, right? Like we can be done with those. And are there people out there who remember? Sure. And many of them are still the people I'm texting all the time, but we all moved through them and learned from them. And we're better people for having had the freedom to make some mischief, make some mistakes, and grow up better for having made them. So, life is more complicated to navigate because of the digital devices and services that surround us. I did not have to worry when I was in middle school that the silly thing I said to my best friend, might get screenshotted and reposted because I whispered it to her in the locker room. I didn't put it in a text message or on social media. Then also, we as adults, many of us, not all of us, obviously parents and caregivers have a range of ages, but I will put myself and the tail end of Gen X. I did not grow up digital. So I don't have lived experience that I can draw on the same way I can when I say to my kid, no, I know it's hard to sit down and finish your homework, but you have to, and here's what we're going to do. Yeah. The other is that these digital devices and services, many of which can be quite life affirming and generative. And certainly during the pandemic, those of us who are privileged enough to have access to wireless and to have access to a tablet or a computer, right? Those were lifelines. So I'm not anti-tech at all. I actually really love digital tech innovation. But I will say that a lot of these devices and services were not designed with parents in mind. And they're designed to sort of almost trick you into this kind of false sense. And I'm holding up my iPhone now, right? So, oh, look, I just have this phone. It's right here on my desk. It's just part of my home. And what I do in it is somehow private. Well, no, it's not. And then, of course, we get into the ways in which so many tech companies, especially our bigger businesses, do, as a form of their business modeling, rely on the acquisition, the repackaging, the sharing, et cetera, of data that you are putting in there. And it really is a very complex storyline for those of us parents who both want the connection and affirmation of our own story as parents and our kids' stories. It is very complicated. Yeah.
The speed of which I think is kind of dopamine inducing, because I remember when we first got internet at my house and you hear the dial-up tone, that AOL dial-up.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that was the least dopamine inducing thing because there was a delay. Right now there's zero delay.
Right.
Well, let's take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll have more with Leah Plunkett. Don't go anywhere. Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Burgoo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at burgoomedia.com. And now back to our conversation with Leah Plunkett.
Is there anything that is exacerbating this in terms of the way we propel these companies to essentially further this technology?
There are some things exacerbating this situation, Nathan. First is that parents in the United States have what I sometimes call supercharged legal protection. We are entitled under federal and state constitutional law, a variety of statutes and regulations, to exercise a lot of autonomy and privacy around how we parent. And I want to be clear, I think that is generally a good premise to start from. I am not a fan of, government control or micromanagement of people's personal lives, people's family lives. I think that goes nowhere good. But one of the problems is that the law is relying on parents to be gatekeepers for their children's digital lives in a way that most of us as parents are not equipped to do. And some of that is generational. And I will include myself again in the generation that, like you, remembers, dial-up internet. And also, and this is actually a bigger point that's not just tied to parents in digital tech, although I think it uniquely impacts us, the underlying legal premise that we as adult consumers are entering into meaningful contracts when we click accept or yes or I agree to whatever click wrap or click through agreement may be on an app or a website. So the really, really long fine print that lawyers write that basically is giving away way too much for all of us who have just about any app or service on our phone. Maybe not quite all of them, but a lot of them. The idea that that is actually a meaningfully negotiated contract, I think, is flawed. My husband, Mike Lewis, wrote an excellent piece on this topic called Pervasive Infancy that's published in University of New Hampshire Law Review that really does a masterful job of laying out how this fundamental notion that we as adults are entering into a freely negotiated exchange with these companies is just wrong. And so that legal fiction of a meaningful negotiated contract really falls apart when you are saying, okay, I as a parent am clicking on this click wrap agreement that I haven't read for a social media site. And I am then going to go on this site and talk not just about my own journey, my own story, but my kids' stories in ways that the law is looking to me to be the gatekeeper, to be the point of contracting authority over how and to what extent and in what ways now and in the future a social media company can use the information I'm posting. I really don't know. And I have no way of knowing, to be fair to me as a parent. Nobody's going to read all of the fine print unless you're a lawyer doing research for a book. And so we do have these compounding layers of parental rights and autonomy on the one hand, and this complete legal fiction, this fallacy that contract law is what is protecting us as parents when we engage the digital world.
This is fascinating because on one hand, I think, okay, we were talking before about the backstop or this concrete law. I thought it's based on something reasonable and protective. This idea that you get to have a knowledge base of what you're about to enter, contract, visibility, all these things. And then I lay it over this, and I said dopamine before, but this interaction that happens in a microsecond based on a chemical flood in my brain for flashy lights or whatever. You know, my algorithms are bonkers because I am notorious for clicking on anything. No control. And so by clicking through, this contract is presented that I can't possibly read because of time frames, but also that I am not inclined to read because of the way this experience transpires. But yet it's based on a fiction, as you said, and this fiction has become the platform. So we are then continuing to push a fiction in a fictional direction, no?
Yes, we are.
What is going to save us? Please tell me a chat bot is going to have some sort of
special powers. I'm a big fan of the robots. I think they're our friends, but truly, I like the robots. So I do think that there are going to be an increasing number of protective factors that come into play. First and foremost, because so many folks are having the kind of conversation that we're having now, and they're having them with their friends at their school boards. They're having them with regulators and lawmakers and directly with companies. So I do think that we are starting to move into a phase that I might liken to, you know, the kind of arc that happened when we went from no one needs seatbelts in cars to we need seatbelts and airbags and child safety restraints. Or maybe tobacco is a better analogy. And I know some of our lawmakers, I believe Senator Blumenthal among them, have been talking about the need for tech to have a little bit of a big tobacco moment where we look around as parents, as regulators, as lawmakers, and just humans, right? We look at the robots and say, you know, we need to have, I hope, thoughtful, ethical, tailored guardrails in place because I would hate to see the hammer swing too far in the opposite direction. So that's one. The next is I do think we are seeing in the United States specifically really great, courageous legislative and regulatory action at a number of state levels around kids and digital privacy. One thing I think really worth paying close attention to is lawmaking that is happening out in Washington state right now that is specifically looking at kids who are making a living or part of a living as influencers and the need to treat those kids. So this is now what I call commercial parenting. We need to treat those kids the same as we would child performers on other stages. Seems like a small move actually would be huge, Nathan, because right now, when it comes to the commercial parenting or influencer sector that relies on kids and families, that is a virtually unregulated from a labor law perspective, multi-million, multi-billion, no one seems to know exactly, industry that is relying on child labor. And so what Washington state is trying to do, super important, super impactful, would be to say, hey, the digital stage is still a stage. The digital workplace is still a workplace. And if you are going to involve children in it, you need to protect them just as you would children appearing in a play or a TV show or a movie. And that is a pretty unique initiative that's focused on commercial parenting. There are also other bills that have been passed or are in the works in many, many other states on other niches within parenting. So notably school digital data privacy. I still call that, you know, what schools do with digital data in my book, literally and metaphorically, still a form of parenting. It's grown-ups handling children's private data and putting it into digital settings. So we are seeing a lot of great state level legislative and regulatory movement. The federal government has a couple of irons in the fire. I think they are likely to move more slowly than our states. And so I put a lot of faith in our states because I do think that digital privacy, particularly for kids, is a bipartisan issue. Because if you are a parent or a grandparent or an aunt, uncle, teacher, coach, or just a human and not a robot, you care about kids in a way that you may not necessarily care about other adults. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just descriptively stating it. So I'm actually pretty optimistic that what we're seeing is not a further descent into the Wild West, but actually a moment where we are starting to see more thoughtful response that I hope will put us on the same storyline of things like seatbelts in cars or regulation legalization of tobacco and so on.
It's fascinating. It's so fascinating. And I share that hope, I think, with the states as you're laying it out. I also share it with the families because I want to kind of hyper localize this, because I think that when I look around my family and I ask myself, are we better off as a unit with this style of sharenting and tech? Mm-hmm. My answer is no, because we are sitting in a unit individualized, not together. So on that level, if no is the answer that people are experiencing, if they were to ask their question, what can they do in the family unit to walk back from this overshare sharenting?
I have a holiday card rule of thumb, and this may only resonate for parents and other adults who are, probably Gen X and older, because I'm not sure younger generations necessarily know, like old-fashioned holiday card letter, right? You type up a page or two and you put it in the card that you're sending to everybody from your boss to your great aunt. And you say, little Susie made the football team and we're so proud of her. So you're sharing information at a level that is appropriate for this kind of general consumption. I'm not aware of a holiday letter ethos that would have ever been, Susie is having a lot of trouble sleeping and is getting into fistfights at school. Like, just not a kind of thing you would put out there, right? And so I would say at the hyperlocal level, when it comes to the sharenting that involves posting narrative or video or image on social media, give yourself a holiday card rule of thumb. If I were to hold myself to the standard of putting this into a letter that went to everybody from my great aunt to my boss, and that everybody in perpetuity could potentially see, right? So not just my great aunt and my boss, but maybe my kid's boss down the road or somebody else's great aunt. Would I share this? And if the answer is yes, then okay, right? That goes back to now the parental autonomy and privacy. But if the answer is like, I don't think I would put this in writing and mail it to everybody, I know, then don't share it. And in terms of the hyperlocal gut check when it comes to sharenting that might be taking place more passively, because we talk a lot about social media posts, but of course, and I did this all the time, especially during the pandemic, right? Okay, I'm trying to get my work done. My kid's done with their remote school. Here, do this educational app. I still call that sharenting, especially for a child who is well under their teenage years and has absolutely no ability to understand what I'm giving them, although they might actually know how to use it better than I do, like in terms of navigating the iPad, but in terms of what it is, that's still sharenting. That's still me as a parent making a decision and literally putting a device in my kid's hands that is going to take and share and repurpose their information. Ask yourself if you can do it in a low tech or no tech way, whatever the it is in your home. And sometimes the answer may be no. And I will freely confess, especially during lockdown and then during those repeat cycles of, okay, school's closed for COVID outbreak or your child tested positive, home for 10 days, whatever it was. Was I doing it in a low tech or no tech way? Absolutely not. I was handing over the device and saying, I've got to get back to my meeting. And I will stand by that as sort of a survival move. And everybody's subjective sense as a parent of what is necessary for those survival moves is different. But if you can do it in a low tech or no tech way, for me, one of the big ones is I don't have the smart home devices in my home. I don't have the assistants that are going to sort of help the home function. I definitely have done both for me and my kids different fitness wearables. I have sort of come down on the side. Maybe this goes back to my exercise coping mechanism. It nudges to get people to move. If you set your privacy settings to be pretty minimal, I think that gamification can be helpful. But I don't have anything in my house that turns on my thermostat or turns on my lights or does anything with my fridge. My kids really want to because they'll visit other friends and be like, this is really cool. I'm like, it is super cool. And also we can turn the lights on and off ourselves, right? And so for me, that's one area where I feel like I am at a hyperlocal level, stopping some flow of intimate data out into the world.
My father-in-law thinks I'm his low-tech app. Just putting that up. Now, if people want to hear more, learn more, where can they go?
I would love to have folks visit me at my author website. That is Leah, Leah, Plunkett, P as in Peter, LUNKETT.com. And I have resources there, including a way to look at a free open access version of my book, as well as other conversations I've had. I also think there's a treasure trove of information that my colleagues and sometimes I have put together over at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, cyber.law.harvard.edu. I think the folks at Common Sense Media, at the Center for Democracy and Technology, and a number of other really great nonprofit and civil society groups are putting out a lot of wonderful resources. And I also think, to your point, the best thing that people can do is talk to their kids, their partners, their relatives, and talk to your school administrators, your school district, and your school board, because our kids spend so much time in school or doing homework on devices issued by schools that one of the most important conversations we can have as parents is just finding out in an open, collaborative, curious way, hey, what are you using in the classroom? What are you sending home with my child? That really matters.
Leah Plunkett, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Same here. Thanks for having me, Nathan.
And if you're a chatbot out there, follow Leah. We're going to need your help.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. Today's show was also brought to you by Merrimack County Savings Bank, who proudly supports the mission and efforts of New Hampshire Children's Trust. Founded in 1867, Merrimack has served people, businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities in central and southern New Hampshire for over 155 years by treating everyone with care, respect, and compassion. Visit your local offices in Bow, Concord, Kentucky, Hooksett, and Nashua, or go to www.themerrimack.com. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.